Greetings, friends. Our topic for this session is very profound and mysterious. It's Joseph's initiation to the dark night of the soul. Joseph had suffered much. One would think that it was time now for God to relax his heavy hand and give the man a break. But God knew the task for which he had called him and saw fit to take him deeper into the dark interior regions of his soul. In fact, God sends him down to the bare bottom of his being. He invites Joseph to experience what has become now as the dark night of the soul. This phrase, the dark night of the soul, is very dramatic, and this is intentionally so. No doubt one's first impression of it will depend on one's temperament, and most probably the first impression would be wrong. For instance, many will find the phrase disheartening, especially in a culture where such imagery is more likely associated with old Saturday afternoon horror movies. The experience is indeed horrifying, but in a very different way than scary movies are. Here let us describe first what the dark night is not. To begin with, it's not a Batman movie. Second, it is not to be confused with the feelings brought about by painful circumstances in life or of loss. Third, it must not be confused with general depression about life, often arising from circumstances surrounding the choices we make. Many live their lives the way they want to, unmindful of God, and get into troubles. Ironically, they will often blame God then, or wonder why he has abandoned them, when in fact they have abandoned God. Now here, judging from this chapter in Joseph's life, where he realizes his deepest fears, seemingly forgotten in a dungeon for 2 whole years, perhaps no longer feeling that God was with him anymore, we might consider that this was indeed Joseph's dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul actually is experienced by those who have had very intimate and deep experiences with God, spiritual encounters like Joseph had had in his dreams. They have enjoyed God and have come to see that God is in fact the greatest of the joys that anyone could have in his life. God is so real to them that everything else seems small. Such spirituality feels so wonderful and holy, and it is so easy to get hooked on the feelings it brings, like a spiritual narcotic. St. John of the Cross calls this spiritual gluttony. When this happens, we are not so much hooked on God, but into our feelings. But God cannot be reduced down to our feelings. As a matter of fact, our feelings are not big enough to grasp God. How does it feel in the dark night? Like Joseph, those who experience it feel utterly abandoned and helpless, perhaps even jilted by God, the soul's lover. There is a parched spiritual dryness where before there was spiritual abundance. Previously, the soul seemed to have God at its beck and call. He was always there. Sure, he may have seemed to hide for a while, especially when our own earthborn clouds arise to darken the sky. But they eventually blow away by the winds of grace. Now the heavens are locked shut, and a spiritual famine moves in. Moreover, a sort of moral dereliction may come in. Impure thoughts may even torment the mind, thoughts which would never be entertained previously in a high state of spiritual elevation. This is especially painful to the soul that has experienced, to some degree, purification. In short, those who are passing through the night no longer feel spiritual. Now the soul actually feels its poverty of spirit. It mourns like it has never mourned, for the spirit is capable of much more suffering than the body. At this point, we may wonder at the methods of God. How is it that he can stand aloof when his children suffer so badly? The strange fact is that he's more present in his seeming absence than when he seems to be present. The dark night is a most holy night, where God savors the sweet sacrifice of the longing soul, desperately stretching out to him in the darkness, and in despair wanders the empty streets for its beloved. Here, true passion is tried and tested. Is the soul ready to die for love? In the end, love is an ordeal by fire, a torment fierce and dire for those who feel compelled to follow their hearts into the divine depths. God in silence stands in the darkness just beyond the glow of the fire and witnesses the victim's self writhing on the altar, making the supreme sacrifice for love. The soul in its anguish asks, shall I ever see my God again? This is in Psalm 42. Many of the Psalms reflect this cry of the desperate soul. An answer echoes out from its hollow core, though I never see him again, still will I love him. Love demands death. This, of course, would be cruel only if God himself was not willing to die for love. Love is a very serious matter. Now, the dark night is absolutely passive. By this we mean that the soul can neither enter into it nor leave it at will. God initiates it, and this state continues till God sees it fit to let it in. It may be for a relatively short time, or it may last for years. However long, it is certainly the most dreadful experience for a soul deeply sensitized to God. When it is finally over, the soul rises higher than ever, secure in the knowledge that God is far bigger than it ever before conceived or felt. It is in the night that true spiritual greatness is born. Men cease to be boys, and women cease to be girls. Both come to possess rugged spirituality, a ruggedness that no longer fears anything, even death itself, for they have already died, and have nothing here on earth to lose. They are detached from all things on earth, both seen and unseen, and are attached to God alone. In their attachment to God, however, they show their tried and tested love by allowing him to come and go as he pleases, confident of his love even when he doesn't seem present. They no longer fear the dark, for they have passed through and have discovered the treasures of darkness and the riches hidden in secret places. In our story, Joseph can again be compared to Christ, who, on the cross, experienced utter alienation from his Father and cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? The moment of deepest anguish and seeming weakness is in fact the moment of deepest spiritual profundity. When Mother Teresa's journals were released, the press made a big deal out of the spiritual dryness and feeling of abandonment she felt for much of her life. It was presented almost as if she was playing a charade in her life, that she harbored this dark secret. Actually, the opposite is true. She was in union with Christ as an offering poured out for love for humanity. May God bless you as you ponder these things.